Summer Game Fest has been historically a bit more amorphous than E3. The first year that it happened, it was pretty tough to pin down when exactly it ended. It was like a 4-month thing, but this year it took more of a concise format with most of the main showcases, Tribeca, Capcom, Day of the Devs, Microsoft, Bethesda, and the kickoff show all taking place within a few days. The only straggler being Sony State of Play, which was like a week prior. Because of that though, it's a lot easier to sit here and say, Summer Game Fest 2022 is over, and it was okay. As usual, a lot of underground titles showed up and showed out, but we didn't get much AAA content, at least not new stuff. There was a lot of updating previous announcements going on. Despite that, there's still a lot of games that I want to highlight from all the showcases in case you missed them or forgot about them, so let's just get into it. By the way, I'm restricting it to games that were either revealed this past week or ones that got their first big moment in the spotlight at this event. I know that's kind of a vague rule, but I wanted to sift out games like Callisto Protocol, Starfield, Redfall, and Silksong, because we're all aware of those by now, while also not disqualifying games that already had a small trailer drop on IGN or something in the past but haven't hit many eyes. And since we're on the subject, looks incredible as ever, looks exactly like I want it, looks promising, but I won't believe a goddamn word they say about this game until I get my hands on it, and honestly, looks a little bit disappointing. This was like the least interesting version of what this game could have been. Fight me. Ding ding ding, honorable mentions. Let's just rapid fire these ones out. Flashback is usually cited as one of the biggest inspirations for any cinematic platformer. Games like Inside, Replaced, and Little Nightmares owe a lot to this game, so it's pretty wild that they're making a sequel after this long. I know for a fact that a corner of the internet was going absolutely nuts for this. Fort Solis interests me because of the caliber of actors that they got on here. You know, no matter what, this game will have incredible performances, and while Troy Baker is basically everywhere, for an indie title to be able to attract him and Roger Clark makes me very interested in the narrative that they're telling. This is definitely one to keep an eye on. Whoa, oops, how'd that picture get in there? That was a total mistake. I mean, man, this is so embarrassing how the fact that snuck in there. With the robot design, the Mick Gordon collab, and the intensely long wait for its release, Routine reminds me a lot of Atomic Heart if it was a horror game instead. We didn't see much of this one, but I hope it's a few years out to recover from the Dead Space overdose that's about to hit all of us. Animal Well is a Metroidvania that's deceptively simple, but actually contains a lot of complicated lighting and layers of secrets that will apparently take years to find in some cases. The way that it's presented and described makes it sound similar to Environmental Station Alpha, which I know makes a lot of people excited. Cocoon, from the former lead gameplay designer at Playdead, looks very unique. Flintlock gives me strong Forspoken vibes, not only in some of the presentation, but also in the sense that I don't know if it'll be a surprise banger or totally fall flat, but it's still worth keeping on your radar. Saints and Sinners Chapter 2 is following up one of the most highly acclaimed VR games to this day, and Rollerdrome takes the style of Sable, the base gameplay of a skateboarding game, and then combines it with some combat and interesting lore. My one concern is that the action looks a bit slow-paced because of the sparse enemy placement, but I dig this gimmick and I think it could turn out really cool. Okay, now that I've wasted your time with a bunch of other stuff, time for the main games. One of only 2 games on this list that I'd consider AAA, Resident Evil 4 was technically the first thing shown off at Summer Games Fest, popping up at the beginning of the June State of Play and surprising absolutely no one that it existed because we've basically known about it for years, but it was still cool to see. This is probably the most beloved Resident Evil game, and somehow I've never played it, although I did just get it on my Oculus, so that's about to change. But while it is more recent and contributes to the whole "do we really need to be remaking games that we're remaking nowadays" discussion, I like that they're doing this. It's a classic, it is honestly showing its age at this point, and bringing it to not only next-gen hardware but also in this refurbished state to PSVR 2 is pretty tight. I guess this spot could have been taken by The Last of Us Remake, which builds off a game that I'm much more familiar with and is one of my favorites of all time, but I tend to agree that as good as this looks, The Last of Us doesn't deserve the remake treatment just yet. That's a little bit silly. I'll still play it, but of the two, I'm more interested in seeing how RE4's remake turns out. While the number 10 slot was the result of 2 different games battling it out and one coming out on top, for the number 9 slot I tried a slightly different tactic. Cheating. I got 2 games at number 9 that are both linked by their central gameplay mechanic, Shim and Ereban Shadow Legacy, which both look like an attempt to answer the question, what if origami was fun? Shim decides to take this in the direction of a relaxing platformer type game. It has some peppy and relaxing music, a nice art style, and straightforward traversal. You move around the world through shadows to reach your destination, and a lot of the time that means shadow hopping between people, animals, and little slingshot things. I'm hoping the puzzles force you to use your brain just a little bit in order to add some depth to the experience, but I liked what I saw of this one. On the other hand, Ereban is more of a fast-paced stealth action game that looks even closer to origami than Shim, but the world it takes place in seems cooler. You seem less prohibited in your movement, and most importantly, there are more dynamic and tactile shadows to move between. I think both these games have a lot of potential to execute on an idea that is really cool in theory, and I hope both are able to nail their respective styles effectively. Next up is High on Life. This is the newest title from Squanch Games, Justin Roiland's studio, and it fits right in with the whole Rick and Morty, Trover Saves the Universe shtick that he's got going on there. According to Roiland, this was kind of a big dream project that they were working towards with their first few releases, and I can totally see that. It looks like they've expanded the scope. There's tons of planets to explore, which apparently change dynamically. There's lots of crazy NPCs and enemy types. People are shoving gerbils into their drones drill heads and smushing them, angry Care Bears on crack are fighting each other, and through it all you got a bunch of talking gun companions that seem very unique in voice, personality, and function. One of them shoots out a platform, another sucks enemies towards you, another has a slow-mo bubble feature. There's a lot of creativity and general mayhem shown in this trailer and the behind the scenes, on top of some clearly considerate design decisions, like how they're describing the exploration as Metroidvania-like. This one's not that far off, and I think it could be Squanch Games' first mainstream hit that really propels the studio to new heights. Time to cheat again, I guess. Birth and A Little to the Left are both satisfying looking point-and-click puzzlers with very different tones. A Little to the Left looks a bit more peaceful, it focuses on household puzzles with multiple solutions, they're promising daily puzzles that'll be slightly different for everyone on top of the dozens of puzzles that'll be in the game at launch, and it has a fun little mechanic where a cat comes and ruins your work from time to time because it's a cat and doesn't really care about you whatsoever. This is an interesting puzzle game that'd be really fun to relax to. Birth seems like an interesting puzzle game that'd be really fun to be sad to. This one looks like it takes on a larger scope, it's far darker in tone and features these solemn bone creatures and a washed color palette. The puzzles seem just as interesting and occasionally abstract, and while it doesn't have the charm of A Little to the Left, it replaces it with a haunting sense of isolation that I think winds up fitting this genre really well. Witchfire seems like the perfect mix of medieval fantasy and modern FPS. This is made by a small team that used to work at People Can Fly, meaning that a lot of them had a hand in Bulletstorm, and the game is planning on going into early access at the end of this year. The combat seems fast-paced and seamlessly integrates powers into this first-person shooter loop, even including what seems to be a Dishonored 2 type linking power. And while the sound mixing on the Summer Games Fest trailer was kind of rough, everything else about the presentation of this game seems great. Firing guns seems really satisfying. They're taking weaponry from different eras and tossing it into a pot with fireballs and ice blasts inside of a medieval setting, and it just looks like all action all the time. Throw in some extra movement options like slides and dashes, and this really starts looking like another tightly made indie FPS, but this time with a team that's got AAA experience. This was actually my favorite thing shown at the main SGF kickoff show, and while that showcase wasn't the best overall, this still deserves a mention as one of the clear standouts. A Plucky Squire is one of 3 games from the Devolver Showcase in the top 5 here, and it might have been 4 games if Cult of the Lamb hadn't shown up last year. I was not kidding when I told everyone that this was hands down the best showcase of the week. The trailer for this started off really simple but definitely interesting, showing off this kind of Zelda-like isometric fairy tale adventure inside of a picture book that featured really sharp artwork and fantastic colors. But then it just went sicko mode by taking things to 3D and showing off what the game would really be capable of. It reminded me a bit of It Takes Two with how frequently the genre changed, but it goes the extra mile by letting you fight in 3D in this household setting and then throwing you into mugs and containers to explore and shoot things. That kind of 3D, 2D mix being reminiscent of Mario Odyssey. And yeah, I just compared this game to Zelda, It Takes Two, and Mario. I'm not saying this is gonna be the greatest game ever made, but that's some good company, okay? The production quality on this is through the roof. It almost doesn't make sense. Even just this quick shot of the wraparound shooter section looks like it could be a smash hit on its own, and honestly, of everything on this list, A Plucky Squire might have the most potential. I cannot wait to hear more about this over the next year. Angerfoot is a game that a lot of people have described as Hotline Miami in 3D, and I think there's a good reason for that. It's a lot like Hotline Miami in 3D. You don't get killed in one hit, but you can get killed really quickly, and the whole concept here is just kicking in doors to destroy goons, shooting them in the face, and moving on. Everything's very destructible and levels are short, so you can get a good sense of the layout quickly to plan out your attacks. Plus, the game starts taking a different shape depending on what shoes you equip. They give you abilities like regaining ammo on kick kills or super dash to clear large distances, which completely transforms the game. While Hotline Miami's X Factor was its music though, having one of the best soundtracks in a video game, period, Angerfoot's X Factor is its humor. Not only are the enemy designs goofy, not only do they Thanos twerk on you when you die, but the one cutscene that I've seen was just peak comedy. You're out here drinking wine and feeding your girlfriend popcorn with your foot, you get a call from a bad guy about a fax that shows a picture of them holding one of your sneakers at gunpoint. It's so stupid, it's so fun. There's a demo out right now which has 11 whole levels for you to play. Check it out, you will not regret it. This one's weird in all of the best ways. Taking a break from Devolver for a second here and touching on the second of 2 AAA games on this list, Long Fallen Dynasty. This was announced at the Xbox conference, but it's coming to PlayStation consoles as well when it releases, and it comes from the producer of not only Team Ninja's other big franchise Nioh, but also the producer of Bloodborne. It takes place in a fictional rendition of the Three Kingdoms period in China and is really pushing the fantasy side of things with this reveal trailer. What I'm hoping is that since this is a new IP and not another Nioh game, we see a lot less of the loop-based gameplay loop and as a result more balanced fights, because those two things are really what hold me back from the Nioh games. There's not a whole lot of information that we can gather from this trailer alone, but it's set for early 2023, which means we'll get some proper gameplay soon, and with this and Black Myth Wukong coming out the same year potentially, we're set for the Souls-like genre to feature more Chinese folklore, and I'm all here for it. Despite being the runner-up on this list, The Last Case of Benedict Fox is the game from the past week that feels most like it was made for me. Dark atmosphere, mysterious story, awesome name, not to mention beautiful, expansive artwork in a Metroidvania bottle that features some snappy-looking hand-to-hand combat, a little ranged action thrown in there, and amazing music to really bring it all home. I don't think anything about this game doesn't look amazing. The voice acting sounds stellar. I'm a really big fan of the different looking areas, especially when the color is stripped away and it gets all spooky. I just don't know how you could look at this game and not be impressed by what you see. The way that the colors play off of each other and the sheer detail of the backgrounds really reminds me of Ori, which I think is the gold standard of Metroidvanias in terms of visual design, but I think it's actually the story that piques my interest the most here, which isn't common for this genre. If you have any kind of knowledge built up on what kind of games I like, you're probably not surprised that I have this so high on my list, but I really expect it to turn heads when it comes out next year. And number 1 is a game that isn't necessarily one that was built for me like the last one, but is instead one of those games that seems so good that you ignore your genre biases and try it out anyways. Skate's story absolutely blew my brother and I away with its showing at the Devolver conference. The music is so spacious and powerful, and every piece of the aesthetic fit perfectly together to create something that I can't look away from. The art style in this game is unlike anything I've seen before, and other previews of the game have shown up how the cinematic angles aren't just a trailer trick. You're actually moving through the world with this unique framing, and it looks incredible. Every landscape looks so different from the last, and the trailer seems simultaneously depressing and uplifting in the weirdest way. Skate's story is something that I find harder to pin down than most other games on this list, and that's why it's so interesting to me. I could see myself getting totally lost in this despite not being a fan of skateboarding games, and if it can maintain the unique allure that it's displayed with this showing throughout the full product, it'll absolutely go down as one of the most interesting games I've ever played. What were some of your favorite games shown off at SGF 2022? Like I said, I tried to keep it to new announcements or games that didn't get much coverage until this week, so there's a lot that didn't qualify, and I'm curious what stood out most to people. Hopefully you found a couple of games on here that maybe didn't hit your radar initially and wound up on your wish list, and I'm planning on keeping that going in the next video, which is going to be about me going over my favorite demos from Steam Next Fest. I'll probably go back to doing a bit more analysis and review stuff after that, but with the two big events going on, I wanted to talk about some fun upcoming titles, so hopefully you guys like hearing about that. If you do and you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.